It is time for bed. So I figured we would read a few bedtime stories. These, of course, are Disney princess stories. Let's go ahead and begin. Let's begin with The Princess and the Frog. This story is called Tiana's Long Night. It was the night before the opening of Tiana's palace. Tiana had dreamed her whole life of opening her own restaurant. Now that dream was finally coming true, if she could just get everything ready in time. Come on, Tiana, you need your rest. Tomorrow is a big day, said Tiana's mother, Eudora. All right, Mama, I'm coming, Tiana agreed. Tiana had one foot out the door when suddenly she stopped. I should check on the gumbo one last time, she said. The gumbo was her father's recipe. Tiana wanted it to be her restaurant's star dish. I'm sorry, Mama, Tiana said, running back into the kitchen. I just need this to be perfect. Tiana pulled out a spoon and tasted the gumbo. Something was off. The gumbo was good, but it wasn't perfect. Tiana couldn't open her restaurant without perfect gumbo. She set aside the old batch and started over. Looks like it's going to be a long night, she said to herself as she got to work. Tiana was an excellent chef, and the gumbo slowly started to come together. Tiana said as she tasted the new batch. That's more like it. All the gumbo needed now was some vegetables. Tiana was just about to start mincing them when she had an idea. A welcome banner would be the perfect way to greet her guests. Leaving the gumbo simmering on the stove, Tiana ran to find some paint and paper. She rolled the paper out in the front entrance and started to make the sign. She was a few letters in when she heard a loud bang coming from the dining room. Now what was that? Tiana asked herself. Putting down her brush, she left the half-finished sign behind and headed into the dining room to find disaster. A big gust of wind had blown open one of the dining room's doors. The band's sheet music for the grand opening was everywhere. Tiana hurried to pick up the papers. She wanted to put them back where they belonged, but she didn't know how to read music. What if she put the papers back in the wrong order? Well, Tiana, you're in a pickle, she said aloud. She looked around. She still needed to slice the vegetables for the gumbo, and the banner needed to be finished. Setting the pile of papers on a table, she headed back toward the kitchen. The music would have to wait. Tiana swung the kitchen door open to find the gumbo where she had left it. Next to it was a plate of perfectly minced vegetables. That's strange, Tiana thought. Who could have done all that work? Tiana was sure that everyone had already gone home for the night. Had she chopped the vegetables herself and forgotten about it? She shrugged. She didn't have time to dwell on the mystery. There was still a lot of work to do. With the vegetables prepared, it wasn't long before the gumbo was done. Tiana took one last taste, just right, before she headed back to finish the sign. But when Tiana reached the front door, she found that she couldn't finish the sign. It was already done and hanging over the entrance to the restaurant. I know I didn't do that, Tiana thought. Who could be helping me with all this work? Confused, Tiana went back to the dining room. She still had all that sheet music to sort through. But when she looked for the pile she had left on the table, it was gone. Tiana walked to the stage. The music had been sorted and placed neatly on each musician's stand. Just then, Tiana heard a happy tune coming from the back deck. Curious, she opened the door. Outside, Tiana saw Louis playing his trumpet. Naveen and Eudora were dancing happily to the music. Well, well, what do we have here? Tiana asked the group, laughing. I knew as soon as you went back into that kitchen that you would find more work to do, Tiana's mother said, giving her a big hug. I wasn't going to let you work through the night all by yourself. I thought you could use some extra hands. Your mother finished your sign, Naveen said. And you know I love to mince. After all, I did learn from the best. The prince grabbed Tiana around the waist, pulling her in to dance. The wind sure made a mess of that sheet music, Louis added. Luckily, I know every song. Putting the music in order was easy. Tiana laughed. Thank you, everyone. I don't know how I would have gotten everything finished without your help. Now there's just one more thing to do, Naveen said. Tiana looked at him, confused. What was she forgetting? We've got to get you home and to bed, he said. You've got a big day tomorrow, and you need your rest. Later, as she climbed into bed, Tiana looked out the window. In the sky, the North Star twinkled down at her. Tiana remembered wishing on a star years earlier. It had been her dream to open a restaurant with her father. She wished he could be with her to see the dream come true, but she knew he would be proud. And thanks to her friends, the grand opening was sure to be perfect, just as it should be. Next, let's read A Nighttime Stroll. This one features Cinderella, one of my favorite Disney princesses. Cinderella Cinderella, Gus yelled, running into Cinderella's room. There's a new mouse in the barn. Her name is Greta. Can she stay with us? Cinderella smiled at her mouse friend. Of course, she said. There's always room here for one more. Cinderella loved her mouse friends. She had rescued them from her stepmother's cat, Lucifer, before she met the prince. Now they lived with her in the palace. Cinderella and the mice got to work. They wanted to make their new friend feel right at home. The mice built a tiny bed for Greta and stuffed a mouse-sized mattress with dandelion fluff from the palace lawn. Meanwhile, Cinderella sewed Greta some new clothes, and Gus made a nightstand out of a spool of thread. Greta will sleep like a baby mouse, Gus said, placing a small vase of flowers on the nightstand. Gus couldn't wait to introduce his new friend to Cinderella. Greta, Gus cried, this is Cinderella. The princess knelt to shake Greta's tiny paw with her pinky finger. You're very welcome here, the princess said. You must be hungry. Greta patted her tummy and nodded. Cinderella smiled at her new mouse friend. Well, why don't we get you dressed, and then we'll have a nice, filling dinner. While the mice had been making Greta's bed, Cinderella's bird friends had prepared a huge welcome feast. There was a baby lettuce salad, grilled cheese soup with tiny toast corners, and every kind of nut the palace kitchen stocked. Greta happily dug into the food while the mice asked her all sorts of questions. Soon Gus noticed Greta's eyelids drooping. Taking her by the paw, he showed her to her new bed. Oh, Greta said, clapping in delight, such a snug bed. Thank you, thank you. Greta climbed into her bed and was soon fast asleep, snoring softly into her dandelion pillow. Later that night, a shadowy figure marched down a path in the royal garden. Halt, one of the watchmen called. Who goes there? The guard knelt down and peered into the shadowy lane. Why, it's one of Her Highness's mouse friends, he said. Greta rubbed her eyes and looked around. Where am I? She asked, confused. The guard smiled and told Greta that she was in the garden. Then he walked her back to the palace. The next morning, Greta told her new friends all about her nighttime adventure. It was so strange, she said. One moment I was in bed, all cozy and snug, having the nicest dream. And then, what happened? Jacques asked. I woke up in the garden, Greta exclaimed, in my nightgown, with no idea how I'd gotten there. The mice gasped. I've never sleepwalked before, not ever, Greta said, taking a bite of a blueberry. Everyone agreed that Greta's sleepwalking was likely a one-time thing. She was probably just getting used to her new bed. That night, Greta went to bed, confident that she'd stay put until morning. A few hours later, though, she woke up at the palace gates with no memory of how she'd gotten there. Then, the night after that, she marched right through the gates and into the street. "Rats," Greta said, as a kind villager walked her back to the palace. Over the next few days, Cinderella and her mouse friends did everything they could to help Greta. Jock tried giving her a glass of warm milk before bed. "Always helps me sleep tight," he said. But that night, Greta woke up in the middle of the village. Gus tried putting noisy crumpled paper around Greta's bed, but she marched right through it without blinking an eye. Cinderella tried putting a mouse-sized gate at the front door, but Greta picked the lock and waltzed right out of the palace without waking up. "I didn't even know I could pick locks," Greta said. "You learn something new every day." "Or every night," Gus agreed. No matter how hard Cinderella and her friends tried to keep Greta inside the palace, nothing worked. Every night she woke up farther and farther away. Finally, very early one morning, Greta woke up with sore feet in a village she didn't recognize. She'd never been that far from the palace before. She couldn't even see it on the horizon. "Where am I?" the little mouse wondered out loud as she walked the streets. The town she'd sleepwalked into was tiny and quiet. Everyone was still asleep. Suddenly, Greta stopped. The most glorious smell was wafting out of a little shop. "A cheese shop!" Greta exclaimed. The glorious smell that practically had her floating closer to the door was cheese. But not just any cheese. "I've never smelled a cheese like that," Greta murmured. It was stinky and rich, and she was sure that it would taste amazing. Greta raced all the way back to the palace. "I solved the mystery," she said, bursting through the door. Greta explained her latest adventure to her friends. "My nose has been leading me to that cheese shop every night," she said. "It just took me a while to get there." Everyone was curious about the amazing cheese. What could smell so wonderful that it made Greta sleepwalk all the way to the next village? So, shortly after breakfast, Cinderella summoned the royal coach. Soon she and her mouse friends were on their way to the countryside. "There it is," Greta squeaked, pointing to the shop. The coach pulled to a stop, and the friends climbed out. The humble cheese shop owner was very surprised to find himself with none other than the royal princess and a handful of mice as his first customers of the day. It took Greta only a few seconds of sniffing around to identify the stinky cheese she'd been sleepwalking toward. "It's this one," she said. The shop owner happily gave Greta a sample. "Oh, it's glorious," Greta said. "It's like sunrise and sunset and smelly feet all rolled into one. Cinderella was glad her new friend had found something she enjoyed so much. With a wink at the shop owner, she bought an entire wheel of the cheese for her little friend. That night, Greta had a wonderful bedtime snack. Several tiny crackers smeared with her new favorite cheese. "Yum," she said, "that really hit the spot." Then, her tummy full, she snuggled into bed, where she stayed all night. How about a Little Mermaid story? This one is Ariel's Night Lights. Let's begin. Princess Ariel loved living on land. For so long, she had watched the human world from a distance, but now she actually got to learn about it up close. One evening, Ariel and Prince Eric decided to eat dessert on their balcony. To Eric, it was a normal, peaceful night, but for Ariel, nighttime on land was full of fascinating new sights. "Nighttime is so different here than it is under the sea," Ariel told Eric. "What do you mean?" Eric asked. Ariel smiled. "Beneath the waves, the only lights we have are glowing jellyfish and the little bit of moonlight that seeps down from the surface," she explained. "But here on land, you have fire that you can use to light up the night." Eric smiled at Ariel. "Fire isn't the only thing on land that lights the night," he said. "I know something else I think you'll love." Eric put out the torches, leaving the balcony in darkness, but not total darkness. Ariel's eyes widened as she spotted a bunch of small, bright sparks zipping through the air around them. With the torches lit, she hadn't been able to see them. "What are they?" she exclaimed. "They're a lot smaller than the jellyfish we had under the sea." Prince Eric chuckled. "They're called fireflies," he said. He caught one and then opened his hand so Ariel could look at it. "See, their bodies light up." Ariel carefully reached for the firefly, gasping in delight as it lit up again. The firefly flew out of Eric's hand. Soon it was lost among dozens of its friends. "They're lovely," Ariel said. "They move through the air as easily as fish through the water." "Does everything here remind you of fish?" Eric teased gently. Ariel laughed. "Not everything," she replied. "Actually, these fireflies remind me much more of something else." Ariel pointed upward. Countless tiny points of light twinkled far overhead. "The stars?" Eric guessed. "Yes," Ariel said. "Fireflies look as if they could be tiny stars that have come to live on land, just like I did." Eric raised his eyebrows. "I never thought of it that way." "It's too bad. There's so much light coming from the palace," Ariel said. "It makes it hard to see all the stars." "What do you mean?" Eric said. "There are plenty of stars out tonight." "Not as many as I could see when I used to sneak up to the surface," Ariel told him. "I suppose it's easier to see them out there because it's so much darker." "I suppose you're right," Eric agreed. "Even if I put out every torch in the palace, there would still be light coming from the village and the farms nearby." Ariel grabbed his hand. "Then let's go where there are no villages and no farms," she said. "Can we please? I want to see the stars, all of them." Eric looked surprised, but he nodded. "I'll summon a carriage." Soon the carriage arrived. Eric and Ariel climbed aboard and rode out through the palace gates. Their carriage traveled through the village and along a windy path up into the rolling countryside. They passed several farms with animals sleeping in the fields. The farther they traveled from the lights of the village, the darker the world around them grew. Finally, the carriage came to a stop at the top of the largest hill. Hopping out of the carriage, Ariel looked around. Far, far below, she could just make out the faint glow of the palace on the horizon. A few lights shone in the houses in the village, but their light didn't reach that far up into the hills. Ariel turned slowly in circles, looking up at the night sky. It seemed there were even more stars to see here than when she had looked at the sky from the ocean. "Oh, Eric, this is perfect," she said. Ariel and Eric walked through the soft grass. Eric laid out a blanket. Ariel sat down, turning her eyes toward the sky. "Look," she told Eric, "now we can see all the stars." Eric lay back, crossing his arms behind his head and taking in the view of the night sky. "You were right, Ariel," he said. "I've never seen so many stars. There are too many to count." Ariel gazed upward. "It's nice to be able to look at the stars," she said. "When I lived under the sea, I wasn't supposed to visit the surface, so I never really got to study the sky. Doesn't that group of stars over there look like a ship?" "It does," Eric said. "And those stars could be a dog. And over there I think I can see a trident like the one your father carries." Ariel pointed at another set of stars. "Those look like my friend Sebastian," she said. Ariel and Eric laughed as they pointed out different shapes in the stars. Suddenly, one of the stars seemed to fall from the sky. Ariel gasped. "Did you see that?" she cried. "That bright star there, it's moving. Look, there's another one." "Those aren't stars," Eric told her. "It must be a meteor shower." Ariel watched the falling meteors. "They're beautiful," she said. "I guess I was right after all." Eric looked over at her. "You were right about what?" Ariel smiled as the twinkling stars reflected in her eyes. The stars really do want to come down to land. The end.